Hi, in this video I'll be reviewing 3 more story arcs that are spread across the Apocalypse Triptych edited by John Joseph Adams. The Apocalypse Triptych is made up of the anthologies The End is Nigh, The End is Now, and The End has Come. The books are themed respectively as life before the apocalypse, life during the apocalypse, and life after the apocalypse. There are 17 story arcs of 3 short stories each that run over the 3 books. And there are some other stories that are kind of on their own as well in the mix. I'll link to the other videos about these books in the description. The first story arc I'll cover in this video is by an author named Jake Kerr. This arc starts with a story called Wedding Day, which is told from the perspective of one person in a lesbian couple. The pending apocalypse is described in the second paragraph, so the author puts it out there right away. An asteroid is going to slam into Earth within the next year. Scientists are working on determining exactly where it's going to hit, but the lack of knowledge creates the predictable fear and lashing out that happens in a society during such a crisis. This story pulled me in and kept me interested. The interactions between the main character and her girlfriend got across the feeling of uncertainty and growing desperation. It asked some tough questions too. Should life carry on normally once it's clear that you might die soon? What about continuing to work when you could spend what might be left of your final days with your family? With everyone trying to find a way out of the death zone, how can anyone hope to get away? What if only part of a family can get away? One idea I thought was interesting was people referred to as the bucket listers in the story. These are basically people that figure they're going to die anyway, so they might as well work on the bucket list that they've had while they wait for the impact of the asteroid. There are anxieties built up through the story, and I'll say that it does have a melancholy ending. I'd rate this story an 8 out of 10. I'd never heard of Jake Kerr before reading this, and I'll probably try to read some of the stories that he has online at Lightspeed Magazine. The second story in the arc is called Penance, and it doesn't follow the main characters from Wedding Day. Instead, it follows a man named Sam Esposito who played a major role in Wedding Day. Basically, the immigration lottery was a system used to pick people that would be transported away from the United States before the asteroid impact. Sam was automatically chosen because he worked for the government as a counselor, delivering the good or bad news to the people that were or were not chosen to be transported away. Now he's on an oil tanker going away from the US, and he avoids people because all he sees is the faces of the people who weren't chosen to go. Survivor's guilt or something similar to that is just eating Sam up. It seems like every time he looks at someone's face, they turn into someone that he had to tell they weren't chosen to be saved. It's made him avoid human contact on the oil tanker despite other passenger and crew efforts to talk to him. That's pretty much what most of the story is about. Though this story is on the shorter side, I think it does a good job of putting the reader in Sam's shoes and showing a couple of the experiences that he had. He seems like he's convinced himself that he doesn't deserve to live after telling so many people that they were condemned. Readers also get a little taste of what the asteroid strike does, though most of it is in Sam's imagination. I enjoyed the story, and I'd rate it a 7 out of 10. The final story in this arc is called The Gray Sunrise. The main character in this one is a guy named Don Willis, who has always dreamed of owning a yacht since he was a child, and he worked his butt off to get one as an adult. Don's not rich, so don't be thinking super yacht. It's a modest boat, but that modest boat is going to save him and his kind of apathetic son, Zach, from the asteroid impact. This story shows how the world changes in a crisis. People are stocking up or trying to take things from other people. Violence or the threat of violence is sometimes the only way to hold on to what you have or what you need to survive. A shift occurs in Don and Zach's personalities as they get onto the yacht and navigate the seas trying to survive. I like this story as a conclusion to this story arc. Don and Zach struggle with external forces while Don tries to figure out how to stir up Zach's spirit. I'd rate this story a 7 out of 10. I'd call this whole arc the Asteroid Cometh. It might have been tough to follow the same characters through all 3 stories, but I might have liked the entire arc slightly more if it had. As it is, my overall rating on this one is a 7 out of 10. The next story arc was written by Tananarive Dew. Sorry if I mispronounced that first name. The first story in this one is called Removal Order. Naima and her cancer-ridden grandmother are the only people left in their neighborhood. The sky is gray and brown from nearby fires, and it's a bit dangerous to go too far from home. But she has to move her grandmother to another house and hope for the best. The apocalypse here is a virus that only 1 in 10,000 people is immune to, and of course, society is collapsing because of it. But this story is really about Naima letting go of her neighborhood. She doesn't want to leave, and she's cleaned up part of the neighborhood, letting go of her former life. She keeps thinking about things her and her best friend used to do together, and it's especially about letting go of her grandmother. She struggles to keep her grandmother comfortable because she doesn't want her to die, even though it's really inevitable at this point. Naima just can't let go, even though it's critical to her survival. The writing in this story is clear, and you get a really good sense of who Naima is. I enjoyed the story, and it kept me guessing what terrible thing was going to happen the entire way. It's a strong story with good character depth, though I didn't really like or dislike the main character all that much. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. The next story in this arc is called Herd Immunity, and we continue with Naima, and it's been a while, but less than a year since that first story. She's traveling on foot, and she starts following a man that she sees ahead of her. He warns her to keep her distance, despite her telling him that he must be what is called an NI, or naturally immune, to have survived this long. To me, this story seemed to be about loneliness. Naima seems desperate to get close to a complete stranger. In a world where people are just trying to survive, this is an extremely dangerous approach to any interaction. You just don't know if someone will react violently to get away from you, or even worse, get violent to take something away from you, including your life. She wants to be close to someone and start repopulating the world, and she doesn't seem to care who the other half of that equation happens to be. Luckily for me, this story didn't dwell on Naima's thoughts surrounding loneliness. It put her in an environment that naturally led to her thinking and doing things that were showing where she was at mentally and emotionally. After reading this story, I still didn't know if I liked Naima all that much, but I would only rate this one about a 6 out of 10. The final story in this arc is called Carriers. Decades have passed since the first two stories, and Naima is in her late 60s now. She has a house and raises chickens for eggs and meat, though she has to fight off feral cats from time to time. Nearby Sacramento has returned to some semblance of civilized society, but they won't let her live inside the walled city because she's one of the survivors of the plague and is considered a carrier. When Raul, another original survivor, tells her that a child that scientists made from their genetic material survived, she can't believe it. Naima has gotten well past the loneliness that was evident in the previous story because she doesn't want to be around Raul for very long at all. He drives her crazy. She also seems a little bitter in this one. She doesn't think the leadership of Sacramento treat her right and is ready to pull a gun on anyone that comes near her house, pretty much. Naima's memories vaguely fill in some nasty things that happened to the naturally immunes, and I'm a little confused how this would have worked. Her memories say she was poked and prodded by scientists that would have had to be adults too. So why didn't they have the plague as well, is what I'm confused about. It just didn't make much sense to me if the plague killed 99.99% of the population. The only explanation I can think of is that she is naturally immune and maybe other surviving adults had gotten a vaccine, but considering that this virus was deadlier than Captain Trips from The Stand, I don't see how enough scientists could have survived long enough to come up with a vaccine, much less produce and distribute one. With all that said, the story was written well, but the memories just felt like too little to build a good picture of what had happened to Naima, and I still don't really like or dislike her as a character. And I'd rate this one a 6 out of 10. I'm calling this the Carrier story arc, and you'll see why after I give my overall rating. Unfortunately, I felt like the world was lightly sketched, and this was more focused on Naima. That's fine, and the stories were good, but I would have liked to see a little more of the world than what was available from Naima's limited viewpoint. Overall, I'd rate this story arc a 6 out of 10. As I was reading this, I wondered if it was related to another story by Mistu called Patient Zero. So I checked, and it turns out that Patient Zero, a story called Danger Word, and the stories I just talked about are all part of a series listed as Carriers on Mistu's isfdb.org webpage. So that's why I called this arc Carriers. Patient Zero is an excellent story that's been anthologized many times and can be read online at Lightspeed Magazine. I rated it an 8 out of 10 when I reread it recently. Danger Word can be found in The Living Dead 2, which is another anthology edited by John Joseph Adams. The last story arc I'll cover in this video is by Jamie Ford, and the first story in it is called This Unkempt World is Falling to Pieces. So this one goes back to 1910, and the narrator is a guy named Darwin Chin Key, who is a 15-year-old that's the son of a British sailor and a Chinese woman. He's never known his parents because he was given to a mission home for half-breeds, then sold into service at a hotel in Seattle. He spends his days and nights serving the rich people that stay at the hotel, and they have comet watching parties. The big event in this story is Halley's Comet passing by Earth. The passage of Halley's Comet is going to be so close that Earth will pass through the tail of it. And this actually did happen, but the comet's calamitous effects in the story did not happen in our reality. The story focuses basically on Darwin's reactions to his boss, to the hotel's clients, and most importantly, to a lady named Lucy Stringfellow. She also works at the hotel, and they share kind of a flirty relationship that's forbidden by the man that oversees the hotel staff. The story has a couple interesting events, and the descriptions were done well. Darwin's not developed too deeply, but there's enough to understand his attitude about things. I'd rate this one a 6 out of 10. It was quite short and written well enough to understand the world and the characters. The next story in this arc is called By the Hair of the Moon. We're still in Seattle, and the viewpoint in this one is a lady named Dorothy Moy. She's an opium addict that's in an opium den when Earth passes through Halley's Comet's tail. She watches as people around her that didn't have enough opium in their system died from the noxious gases that permeated the atmosphere. Something about the content of the opium supposedly has allowed her to survive. It getting into her blood and being prevalent enough has made it so that she can survive whatever killed everybody else. The story is basically Dorothy wandering around during the destruction wrought by the comet. She has a tenuous connection to Darwin from the first story, and both of them are supposedly tied up in a prophecy that she fled from once she found out about it. That really doesn't end up playing much of a role in the story later, so I'm not even sure why it came up unless there are other stories that are related to this in other books or online. Dorothy actually came from China across the Pacific with a bunch of other women, and there are some interesting things that she remembers about that trip across the Pacific and how some of the women that she was with were treated. Other than that, I didn't think really much of this story. Like the previous story, it was descriptive and the character was interesting, but mostly because of her past, not because of what she did in the story itself. I'd only rate this one a 5 out of 10. The last story in this arc is called The Uncertainty Machine. This story takes place completely in a bunker under the streets of Seattle. A guy named Phineas is a rich man with followers who they know that he's in the bunker, and he expects them to come and dig him out, but he's got supplies for a while and he's not in a huge hurry. He also has a mysterious box that can answer questions about anything as long as the answer does not directly apply to him. The box in this story is the uncertainty machine of the title, and it ties it to the second story in this arc. It's an interesting idea, especially for a technology that's basically a difference engine. I thought Phineas was sort of interesting, but like Dorothy in the previous story, he didn't really seem to do much. He does struggle with being alone in the bunker, and he starts to have various shortages that affect him: food, water, that kind of stuff. However, I didn't find myself caring that much because he just seemed like a rich jerk. I'd rate this one a 5 out of 10. Overall, I'd rate the Halley's Comet arc a 5 out of 10. The stories were okay, though I didn't feel like all that much happened in them. I actually had the feeling that these could be the first 3 chapters in a novel, really. Maybe they are, I don't know. So there you go. That's 3 more arcs spread across the Apocalypse Triptych. I enjoyed the Asteroid Cometh story arc much more than the Carriers or the Halley's Comet arcs. I think the Children of Abraham and Digital Gods arcs that I covered in Apocalypse Triptych Review Part 1 were better than these arcs. If you want to tell me where I'm wrong, or what I missed, or just say anything about books and short stories in general, please put something below in the comments. Bye for now.